The RTE board could be facing calls to quit over toy show The Musical Fiasco. I'm joined in studio by Fionnan Sheehan, Ireland editor of Independent.ie, who's been writing about this. Fionnan, good morning.
Morning, Pat.
It hasn't gone away.
No, and there'll be a spate of it over the coming days, debate ongoing about the licence fee. We will have a report coming out on the severance packages that were in place in RTE, which seem to be favourable for certain individuals. The top 10 earners for 2022 is due out as well pretty soon, not exactly sure when, and that will have former presenter now, Ryan Tubridy, still at the top of the table, and we'll see how they treated certain payments to him from the famous Renault deal during 2022 in those figures. And then imminently, probably before the end of the week, we are expecting the investigation into Toy Show the Musical to be published. And that will basically look into how on earth did RTE manage to lose 2.2 million of licence fee payers' money on a show that was put ahead that ran without any due diligence, any checking, any safety net seemingly in place, and nobody asking any basic questions around how much was this going to cost and what was the risk attached, and also how it was that subsequently, when the thing was a flop and cost all this money, that information wasn't divulged. It wasn't until the Oireachtas committees started looking into the payment scandal that this information started to come out from RTE, and they were starting to come clean.
Now, we're talking about a show that did not run in 2023. I mean, it was the 2022, the winter coming up to Christmas of 2022, where it ran in the convention centre for a limited number of shows. Has the board not changed significantly in the meantime?
Not really. There are several members of the board still in place from that time, around about half, because while there has been massive changeover on the executive level in RTE and at senior management.
And the executive involved with Toy Show the Musical fell on his sword early on.
Pretty much most, if not all of the people who were involved back then are now departed, and we have a situation though where the only board members are really gone are ones whose terms of office ran out. There has been a recent departure to go to another role within the organisation. We still have basically half the board were in place at that time, and what we know already is that this Grant Thornton investigation into Toy Show the Musical will also be looking at the processes at board level. That was discussed at the RT board subcommittee that will be looking into this matter. They said it was important that process be looked at. So there was all sorts of finger pointing going on here in terms of, Dee Forbes was across it, and Moya Doherty, the former chair, she was across it, and so on. Shuni Rahali, who is the current RT chair, who was not the RT chair at the time, not on the board at the time of Toy Show the Musical, she has been quite clear in terms of her view of the board's role at the time. She pretty much lambasted the board's actions last summer in a private meeting that we didn't really hear about until later. She said there was no risk assessment done, there was a weakness in board controls, that there was a lapse of control, a lack of rigorous interrogation by the board. So, I mean, she's looking at the people sitting around the table with her, and basically saying there was a lack of rigorous interrogation by the board. The board members themselves also admitted there should have been more stress testing. There was a presentation provided to the entire board which included figures. There was no formal approval process. They were aware of the project and the figures, and they did not halt the project. Dee Forbes also mentioned back in 2022, as this was going through and being set up, that several board members were across it. And what were the board members doing at the time? Well, actually, they were welcoming the initiative. They were saying, this is great. Altogether, RTE should be diversifying, and this will be a great addition to the landscape. And then when the show was about to start, they were congratulating Dee Forbes on the show. There's no record of any questions being asked about the finances, the risk, the figures, the costs, what happens if you were still coming through the tail end of COVID and so on. So big culpability here for the board. So we'll wait and see what Grant Thornton have to say about that. But one doubts that is going to be all that different to what the RTE chair herself had concluded about the board's actions here.
It may well involve a discussion as to what the board does and what the executive does.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you had Moya Doherty as chair of the board, who obviously had also been ill during some of this period, but had great experience in bringing Riverdance to becoming a global sensation. And so there was that expertise, if you like, on the board, but precious little else.
But
in terms of people who would know how to run a show.
Yeah, and I mean the board's job is not to be a theatre critic and say we think that the story is great here. It's basically to be the watchdog. On behalf of the minister, on behalf of the licence fee payer and the taxpayer, and that's where they fell down here because they didn't carry out the adequate checks that should have been put in place at the time. Pointing towards the chair and saying, "Oh well, the chair was across it." I mean, that your job isn't to sit there on a board and basically nod along. To say, oh, the chair has covered this, therefore I've nothing to do with me. And we'll also see that this issue that has really come to the fore within RTE around the executive's powers versus the board's powers, the crossover and who knew what when, seems to have fallen down on multiple occasions. So that won't just feed into this report, but there's wider reports on corporate governance coming up.
Part of the reason that the whole thing flopped, number one, it was in a location that maybe was not suitable, the convention centre, a big venue, an expensive venue. Perhaps the toe in the water should have been more modest. Would it have been the board's job to say, hang on a second, you should be in the Father Matthew Hall and not in the convention centre? The script, it turns out there wasn't a particularly happy story to be told. Ryan Tubridy was not to be featured, as he calls himself the Toy Man. The Toy Man was not even featured as part of the script. But would it be the board's job to actually interrogate scripts and personnel, storylines, and all of that?
No, but that's actually what the board started doing. Started congratulating the director general at the time, D. Forbes, on the storyline and saying this was great. So that wasn't their role. What their role was to look at the feasibility of this project, the costs associated with it, and how much was going to come back in. As you say, the venue was an issue because of the cost of hiring out a place as big as the convention centre, rather than, as you say, dipping their toe in the water in a smaller venue. It would appear, we think that the report will cover this, that RTE kind of left it too late to get any other venue, and they ended up going for the biggest one in town. They ended up in a situation where they had projected that they would sell something like 90,000 tickets. There was only 11,000 sold in the end. There was a lot of other complimentary and competition tickets. A complaint from the sector at the time was that they were basically trying to clean out the traditional panto sector that runs in Ireland on an annual basis, that have built up an audience. And here they were up against a juggernaut that was backed by blanket TV and radio ads of RTE selling their own product, which was in competition for the limited amount of money and audience that is out there. Are you saying
it was abuse of a dominant position?
Well, they were certainly in a position, and this was raised at the Oireachtas committee as well. The amount of advertising that this show got did seem to be kind of disproportionate. And there were question marks raised as well about what exactly was the cost of that, how was that accounted for. So again, we expect that Grant Thornton will look into issues like that. An issue arose last year about the accountancy treatment of sponsorship revenue within Toy Show the Musical. We expect that to be covered. But largely speaking, it'll be, this was the watchdog that not only didn't bark, but seemed to be lapping up this project rather than raising any fundamental questions about it.
Now, on the other hand, is this 2020 hindsight? Had this been a smash hit in the convention centre, filled every seat, made a packet for RTE, everyone would be saying it was great?
Yeah, I mean, defeats are always end up being a blame game, and victories are shared by everyone. So that's the way it works. But I mean, the role of a board is to make sure that, look, at least these questions are raised. If there was a record here within the board minutes of members of the board saying, listen, we need a risk assessment here. We think it's worth going down this route. We think RTE needs to be doing projects that will generate revenue. Some will win, some will lose, some will work, some will fail. But there doesn't seem to have been any such risk assessment carried out. And while the RTE board can say, well, the executive and the management didn't do that, it was their job to basically ensure that such checks and safety nets were put in place.
Fionnan Sheehan, Ireland editor with The Independent, thank you very much for joining us.